And looking at those strategic goals, it seemed that, at least with respect to Afghanistan, what the president was endorsing was a very maximalist strategic goals and a maximalist strategy to address his policy aims in Afghanistan. I apologize if I'm being condescending in any way, but war takes place at 4 different levels. So you have the political, the strategic, the operational, and the tactical, and each should inform the other going downward. Too often, when wars are run poorly, the tactics inform the operations, which drive the strategy, which then drives the policy. What I think happened in the first part of the Obama administration, in the first year that the president was in office, is that he established the priority, established strategic goals, and then once you match those goals to resources, at that point, then you've got kind of a coherent strategy. So what the president did was, in the March paper, at least arrived at his stated policy aims and then associated strategic goals, and then turned it over to a new commander on the ground in Afghanistan, Stan McChrystal, to think about how he would operationalize those strategic goals and then submit a resource request and tell them, here's how many folks I'm going to need to do it. I participated in that initial, General McChrystal's initial assessment group. There are a couple things that I think that I just want to highlight based upon what we were able to discern. The first was how little we knew about Afghanistan even after 8-9 years of conflict. Again, I left Afghanistan in 2004, went to southern Lebanon and to Beirut, and immersed myself in studying another conflict. So, I had been focused through a soda straw looking at another conflict. And when I turned back to Afghanistan 5 years later, what struck me was how little we knew about the Afghan people, how little we knew about the conflict environment itself. And when you'd sit down and you'd talk to intelligence officers on the ground in Afghanistan, if you were to ask any questions about, the enemy, you'd get a pretty good answer. So if you sit down next to a battalion S2, an intelligence officer for a battalion, you say, tell me about the Taliban. Well, sure enough, he or she could give you size, disposition, composition, most likely course of action, most dangerous course of action. But if you think, and we are beginning to suspect this, that what the government did or failed to do was just as important as what the Taliban did or failed to do, and that maybe what local power brokers were doing was actually driving the conflict as much as enemy combatants, then the set of questions you might need to ask are different. So then would turn around and ask, who controls the water here? Who are the local power brokers? How do they make their money? What are their ties to the government? What are their ties to the insurgency? Who are they related to? And more often than not, you get a blank expression. That really worried me because, again, in 2009, we'd been in Afghanistan for almost 8 full years. And then the second thing, I touched upon this other thing, which is that we arrived at the conclusion that in terms of what was driving the conflict in Afghanistan, what the government of Afghanistan was doing or failing to do was at least as important as anything that the insurgency was doing. And I'll return to that a little bit later. After that initial assessment, which you've probably all read, thanks to Bob Woodward, the president, I think, took a step back. And I think he did the responsible thing. In the same time that you have this strategic planning process, you also start out with a list of assumptions. Maybe one of your planning assumptions is that our interests broadly align with those of the government of Afghanistan. Or as we increase our troop numbers, the level of violence will go down. This may, for example, have been associated or have been derived from the way we had interpreted our actions and what had happened in Iraq in 2007 and 2008. You'll note that in Iraq, in December of 2006, President Bush announced a large troop surge. That troop surge pushed into Iraq in the early part of 2007, correlating with that increased number of troops, as well as new counterinsurgency tactics. You had a dramatic drop in ethno-sectarian violence in Iraq, which led a lot of people to conclude that we had, quote-unquote, won the surge through our force of will, through larger troop numbers, through better counterinsurgency tactics, while at the same time maybe ignoring a lot of other things going on. Other folks pointed to, it wasn't that, it was the tribal awakening in Anbar province that actually caused the drop in ethno-sectarian violence. Or it was Muqtada al-Sadr staying on the sidelines during 2007 that actually drove this drop in ethno-sectarian violence. Or, I don't know, find something. These are just the phenomena that we were able to observe. I think what's clear is that in an environment as complex as Iraq in 2007, it's very difficult to isolate any one thing that we did or that anybody else did that drove that drop in ethno-sectarian violence. And in addition, if you were to then go beyond that and try to rank order causality and say that, well, this is the most important thing, so that if we do this, then maybe that'll have the same effect, I think that's a fool's errand as well. But we can establish correlation. We know that a certain number of phenomena took place in Iraq, and that correlated with a drop in ethno-sectarian violence. I think one of the things that the Obama administration did in the fall of 2009, well, I don't think, I know this, is they took a step back and they questioned some assumptions. For example, well, okay, one of the things that General McChrystal just said is that if he doesn't have progress on the safe havens, the sanctuaries rather, in Pakistan, that he's not going to be able to reduce the insurgency in Afghanistan. Well, okay, hold on. If that's true, then okay, Director of the Central Intelligence Agency or Secretary of State, what are the odds that we're going to have some sort of Pakistani movement against the sanctuaries in the Northwest Frontier Province and the federally administrated tribal areas? Because if we're not going to have any movement, then it makes no sense for me to send 30,000 more troops or 40,000 more troops or 80,000 more troops or even 10 more troops into Afghanistan if we're not going to be able to have that type of effect. And so I think what took place in the fall of 2009 was, again, questioning of some basic assumptions about our strategy. On December 1st of 2009, President Obama came out with his speech at West Point. He re-articulated, almost word for word, the same policy aim that he had given for Afghanistan and Pakistan in the March of 2009 speech and in the white paper that Bruce Riedel helped edit. But at the same time, the strategic goals were toned down much more. There was no more talk of this more maximalist strategic goals. It was really about discussion of counterinsurgency, as again we now know through Bob Woodward, was tossed out, as was the word counterterror. We were basically talking about building up certain key Afghan institutions in order to build up the Afghan government so that we could then transition. And he set a date for transition as July of 2011 when that would begin. Okay. From there, that authorized a troop surge. There was nobody subscribed to Rolling Stone anymore, but there was something that happened in last summer. There's a new commander that came aboard in Afghanistan. General Petraeus took charge after some rather unfortunate comments by some General McChrystal staff members in Rolling Stone magazine. And the final troop surge was actually completed just last October with the arrival of the 10th Mountain Division's division headquarters into Kandahar. So since then, a number of things. We've been able to see a couple different things since the summer, and I'm going to highlight just a few of them. Again, I spent about 6 weeks traveling all around Afghanistan in the summer of 2009. I was very depressed by what I saw. I spent about 2 weeks or about 10 days traveling around Afghanistan last month for the command, and then another 4 days in Kabul doing some research for CNAS. Saw a number of different things that I consider very positive. Saw a number of different things that very much worry me. I'll share a couple of them right now.